Could a desperate act of love become the biggest unsolved bank robbery in the quiet history of the Midwest? And what small, sticky piece of evidence would finally unravel 15 years of silence? Before you find out, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new interesting videos. Now let's move on to the story. The small town of Cedar Creek, nestled against the winding Tarkanian River, was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, and that was its quiet pride. It was 1983, a year of big hair and slow economic recovery. But for most in Cedar Creek, things were still tight. This tightness was a crushing reality for the Hayes brothers, Elias and Silas. Elias, the elder at 28, was a maintenance worker at the crumbling Tarkington Mills paper factory, a place that smelled permanently of sulfur and stale wood pulp. Silas, 24, worked the night shift as a stocker at the local J&M grocery. Their combined meager income barely covered the rent on their small, peeling, clapboard house, let alone the burgeoning medical bills for their younger sister, Ilara. Ilara, then just 15, was suffering from a rare, aggressive form of childhood leukemia, and the experimental treatment in the distant city of Port Vista was a dizzying $500,000 away. Elias carried the worry like a physical burden, the scent of the mill's cheap oil often mingling with the faint antiseptic smell of Alara's sickness that clung to his jacket. "We need the money, see? Now," Elias muttered one cold October evening in the dimly lit garage they used as a workshop. His voice was low, rasping. Silas, usually the more impulsive and talkative brother, merely nodded, polishing a heavy chrome helmet. They had been subjected to months of petty humiliation at their workplaces. Elias's overtime constantly denied, Silas's hours mysteriously cut after he complained about a safety issue. The local bank, the First Fidelity of Cedar Creek, represented the only potential escape. The First Fidelity was a squat, solid building, more fortress than financial institution. Elias had been studying it for 6 months, meticulously cataloging the comings and goings. He'd learned that on Thursdays, the bank transferred a large reserve of cash to the regional hub. He'd estimated, based on a disgruntled former security guard's drunken boasts, that the bank held roughly $500,000 in its vault on a typical non-transfer day. That was their target, the exact amount needed for Alara's treatment. Their plan was simple, perhaps dangerously so. Disguised in dark, surplus army fatigues and motorcycle helmets, vintage, heavy-duty ones that obscured their build, they planned to hit the bank just before closing on a quiet Tuesday. Elias had modified his old Triumph motorcycle, attaching a wide, rugged sidecar for the escape. On the morning of November 17th, 1983, a thin, cold rain fell, mirroring the mood inside the Hayes small house. Elias gently kissed Alara's pale forehead. "Just a little longer, sweetie. Everything's going to be fine," he promised, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The air inside the bank was warm and smelled of old paper and the faint, metallic tang of coins. It was 2:47 p.m. Only 3 tellers and the bank manager, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, were present, along with one elderly customer. The sudden, brutal sound of the Triumph's engine roaring right up to the front steps shattered the afternoon silence. Elias, carrying a heavy duffel bag, moved with a terrifying economy of motion. He held a non-lethal, though imposing, service pistol stolen months ago, aimed low. Silas stood guard near the door, a sawed-off shotgun aimed at the ceiling. "Everyone on the floor? Now!" Elias's voice was distorted by the helmet's mic, a high, metallic shriek. The terror was immediate. The elderly customer whimpered. Mrs. Vance, though trembling, tried to reach the alarm button beneath her desk. "Don't touch anything," Silas barked, his voice unnaturally deep. The click of the shotgun being primed was the loudest sound in the universe. Before you find out what happens next, subscribe and comment when you watch this video. Elias shoved the duffel bag at the central teller, a young woman named Clara Jenkins. "Fill it. Big bills only. Everything in the main vault and the registers. You have 60 seconds." He checked his watch, a cheap digital piece. Clara Jenkins, frozen for a moment, suddenly scrambled to obey. When Elias followed her into the vault, a small, poorly lit space, he was stunned. The vault was not half empty. It was overflowing. A miscommunication in the bank's internal security system had caused a temporary, unscheduled storage of a massive cash reserve intended for another city's central clearinghouse. "What is this?" Elias hissed, staring at stacks of wrapped currency that went far beyond his estimation. It's the Port Vista Reserve," Clara stammered, tears streaming down her face. "They forgot to transfer it yesterday. There's almost $3 million. Elias's hand shook. The weight of the bag, once filled only with hope, now felt toxic. This wasn't just Ilara's salvation. This was a national-level heist. It took them 3 agonizing minutes to stuff what they could, well over $2.8 million, into the duffel bag, ignoring the 60-second deadline. The extra weight was a crippling liability, but Elias couldn't leave the chance. 2:54 p.m. Sirens, distant but growing, could be heard over the Triumph's uneven idle. The manager, Mrs. Vance, had managed to hit the silent alarm moments after they entered the vault. They burst out, the heavy duffel bag slung awkwardly between them in the sidecar. The roar of the old motorcycle was deafening. Silas, his face damp with sweat inside the helmet, navigated the town's back streets. They sped toward the river road, their pre-planned, hidden exit route. At the intersection of Elm and Creek Road, their luck dissolved. A patrol car, responding to the alarm, cut sharply across their path. Silas swerved violently. The sidecar clipped the curb. The entire motorcycle shuddered and wobbled. The duffel bag, poorly secured, tore on a jagged piece of metal. A torrent of $100 bills momentarily filled the air. Elias, looking back, saw the patrol car hesitate. They were exposed, but the officers, momentarily blinded by the flying cash, had missed their turn. As they sped up the dirt road, the strain on the old engine and the sidecar proved too much. A sudden, terrifying hiss and burst of orange light erupted from the engine block. The Triumph had caught fire. "Jump! Now!" Elias yelled, pulling the duffel bag close. They ditched the burning motorcycle near a derelict tool shed, the smell of burning oil and rubber overwhelming the crisp autumn air. They managed to grab the bag and disappear into the dense, rain-slicked woods as the first police cars screamed past, heading for the flaming wreck. The case was immediately taken up by the state police and the FBI, given the massive sum involved. The local officer assigned to the case was Detective Sergeant Arthur Art Miller, a 25-year veteran of the Cedar Creek Police Department. Miller was methodical, tired, and deeply suspicious of the outside interference. Working alongside him was a young, sharp-eyed FBI agent, Evelyn Reed, fresh out of the academy, armed with new theories and a relentless, if slightly naive, enthusiasm. The evidence was almost nil. The burned-out shell of a modified Triumph motorcycle, a few tire tracks in the mud, and the terrifying, consistent testimonies of the bank staff about 2 masked men. The police theorized a professional crew must have been operating, given the audacity and the high-value target. Miller and Reed spent weeks interviewing every possible witness. Their first major break, however, led them down a dangerous false path. Archive, Police Report Excerpt, December 5, 1983. The recovered motorcycle frame was traced to a VIN registered to Kenneth R. Sterling, a known petty thief and drifter with a history of motorcycle theft in the state of Clarion. Sterling was located in Port Vista, hospitalized following an unrelated shooting incident, providing a verifiable alibi. It is theorized the bank robbers stole and modified Sterling's vehicle, using it as a disposable means of transport, creating a false flag. This focused the investigation on the Port Vista organized crime syndicates. Agent Reed championed this theory, spending months correlating the heist with known crime families, their sophisticated methods, and their ability to execute a multi-million-dollar score. Miller, however, remained skeptical. He'd lived in Cedar Creek his whole life. This crime felt too clumsy, too localized for the cold precision of organized crime. "It's the money, Miller. $3 million buys a lot of silence," Reed argued during one late-night briefing. "It's the noise, Reed. The motorcycle the flaming getaway, the torn bag. Professionals don't make that kind of noise. They don't leave a trail of money like breadcrumbs. But the official narrative solidified. The first Fidelity heist was an organized crime operation executed by out-of-towners. The community, relieved to think the evil came from somewhere else, accepted this. Life in Cedar Creek slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, punctuated by the ghostly presence of the unsolved crime. Years passed. The case, now dubbed the Obsidian Heist by the press for the dark, impenetrable silence surrounding it, went cold. Miller retired from his CPPD, but the case never left him. Reed moved on to other assignments, though she always kept a file labeled Obsidian. In 1996, Miller, now in his late 60s, was volunteering at the old police archive, a dusty, neglected space in the town hall basement. He was simply cataloging old evidence boxes, an act of bureaucratic closure. He pulled out a box labeled 1983 FFC Heist. Motorcycle miscellaneous. Inside, tucked away beneath a brittle, fire-damaged piece of chain, was a single non-monetary item that had been logged by the initial forensics team, but dismissed as insignificant. It was a small, grimy piece of paper stuck to the inside lining of the scorched duffel bag fragment. The paper was stiff, the edges curled, and the center bore a faintly greasy stain. It was a receipt printed on cheap, old thermal paper. The receipt, dated November 16, 1983, the day before the robbery, and timestamped 10:27 p.m., was for a small grocery purchase. J&M Grocery, Cedar Creek 1X tube tire patch adhesive, 2.50, 1X lighter fluid, 1.25, 1X soda, 0.50, total, for $1.25. The last line was the most significant, a faint, almost invisible imprint from a rubber stamp. S. Hayes, employee number 412. Before you find out what happens next, subscribe and comment when you watch this video. The employee number 412 stamp was a relic, a way for J&M stockers to mark inventory errors or minor customer refunds. And S. Hayes was Silas Hayes, the brother of Elias Hayes, both of whom had lived in Cedar Creek their whole lives and whose sister was known to be desperately ill at the time of the heist. The flimsy paper with its sticky residue of tire patch adhesive, meant for patching the motorcycle sidecar, didn't point to Port Vista organized crime. It pointed straight back to Cedar Creek, to a desperate brother trying to save his sister. And the receipt had only just been identified because the name S. Hayes had only been a local name, irrelevant to the FBI's broader national investigation. Arthur Miller ran a trembling hand over the brittle paper. He knew in his gut that this was the answer, the real start of the story, 15 years too late. But the Hayes brothers had vanished the day after the fire. They'd never used the money locally, never bragged, never even bought a new car. They had simply disappeared like smoke. What desperation drove a man to use a work stamp on a supply receipt for a multi-million-dollar crime? And where did two small-town brothers hide a fortune for over a decade? If you want to know what Detective Miller did next and what the Hayes brothers' final fate was, subscribe and write the city you're watching from in the comments below. The year was 1998. 15 years had passed since the Great Obsidian Heist. The small, brittle receipt with the faintest Hayes, employee number 412 stamp sat on the desk of Detective Arthur Miller. He was no longer an officer, but the case was his ghost. The receipt was small, yet it carried the undeniable scent of the truth. A local truth, not a distant criminal conspiracy. Miller immediately contacted Agent Evelyn Reed. Reed, now a hardened veteran working out of the Midwest Regional Office, was initially dismissive. "Art, we closed that file years ago. The Port Vista connection was confirmed. That receipt is a minor error, likely unrelated inventory." Miller, his voice tight with years of suppressed frustration, countered. "Evelyn, the receipt was found stuck to the lining of the getaway bag. It lists tire patch adhesive. Silas Hayes worked at that grocery store. His sister, Elara, was dying. The timeline, the motive, the location, it's all local. You spent 15 years chasing ghosts. I've just found a man's name." His conviction was palpable, cutting through the crackle of the phone line. Reed, respecting Miller's old-school instincts, agreed to reopen a cold case review, but only unofficially. They started with the basics. Silas Hayes's social security number. It was inactive. Elias Hayes, also inactive. The Hayes family home had been sold cheaply 6 months after the robbery. They had simply ceased to exist in the public record. Reed initiated the use of modern financial tracing techniques, something unavailable in 1983. Deep dives into obscure offshore banking routes and new digital signature tracking. The breakthrough came 6 months later, not through the digital trail, but through a paper one. In the early 1990s, before global digital banking was common, a small, virtually unknown financial institution in the Cayman Islands, the Coral Trust Bank, had been flagged by international regulators for its opaque holdings. Agent Reed, cross-referencing the estimated heist amount, $2.8 million, with unusual activity from that period, discovered a large, complex series of structured deposits beginning in early 1984. The account holder was listed under a shell corporation named Ilera Holdings. Ilera, Miller whispered, staring at the printout in the FBI field office. The name of the Hayes brothers' sixth sister. The structured deposits, designed to avoid suspicion, totaled exactly $2,810,000. The funds had been carefully laundered, making it nearly impossible to trace the initial source. But the timing was perfect. Reed's face tightened with sudden, fierce understanding. They did it for her. They weren't a syndicate, Art. They were just two desperate, scared brothers. The money had been dispersed over the years, the majority funneled into a long-term medical trust fund in Switzerland, specifically for advanced treatment of rare hematological disorders. They had bought their sister life. The remaining funds had been channeled into a single, low-profile property purchase in a remote coastal town of Port Rourke, Maine, far from their Midwestern roots. The owner was listed as E. Silva, a simple anagram of E. Silas. Port Rourke was a fishing town, isolated and gray. Elias and Silas Hayes, now in their early 40s, had lived there for over a decade. They had changed their names legally to Elias and Silas Stone. Elias worked as a ship mechanic, Silas as a solitary lighthouse keeper. They lived a Spartan life in a weathered saltbox house on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, a house that, despite their wealth, was sparsely furnished, a constant, silent penance. Miller and Reed flew to Maine, approaching the investigation with caution. They weren't hunting hardened criminals. They were tracking two men who had committed one massive crime for a deeply moral reason. Their first surveillance was of the lighthouse. Silas Stone, the former Silas Hayes, was a gaunt, quiet man, his hands permanently scarred from decades of hard labor. He looked older than his years, the sea air seeming to etch deeper lines of worry into his face. They watched as he walked the rocky path down from the light, carrying a simple lunch pail. Transcript. Surveillance tape, November 2nd, 1998, 14:15 read. He never looks up, always watching his feet. Miller. He's not watching his feet, Evelyn. He's watching his past. Every step is a lie. Reed. Static noise, a sigh. He looks exhausted. The money didn't buy them happiness. The team discovered that Ilera, now 30, was alive and working as a nurse in a Port Vista Children's Hospital. The funds had saved her. She had no contact with her brothers, believing they had simply moved away years ago to find work, occasionally sending anonymous gifts. The brothers had never told her the truth, keeping her completely innocent. However, the surveillance revealed a tragic, internal cost. Elias Stone, the elder brother, looked gaunt and frail. A quick, discreet check of local medical records, using the anagram Stone, confirmed Miller's fear. Elias was terminally ill with advanced lung cancer, a cruel irony given the sacrifice he had made. He had weeks, perhaps months, to live. This health crisis gave Miller and Reed their moral leverage. They didn't want a bloody confrontation. They wanted the truth and a chance for the surviving brother to find peace. On a rainy Tuesday, the same day of the week as the robbery 15 years earlier, Miller and Reed approached Silas at the lighthouse keeper station. Silas didn't run. He looked up, and his face, aged and weary, showed no surprise, only a deep, profound relief. "I knew this day would come," he said simply. He led them inside the small, damp office, the smell of brine and old oil filling the air. "We know about Elara Holdings, Silas," Reed stated, placing the photo of the First Fidelity Bank, taken on the day of the robbery, on his desk. "We know about the tire patch receipt. We know about Elara. Tell us why." Silas didn't deny anything. He looked at the floor, then out at the turbulent sea, the white-hot beam of the lighthouse cutting through the gray mist. Transcript. Interview recording, November 3rd, 1998, 11:30 Silas Stone, heavy intake of breath. Elias. He found out the clinical trial opened up. Said we had 4 weeks before the slot was gone. We had nothing. Less than nothing. At the mill, they cut his pay again, laughed at him. At the grocery, they treated me like dirt. They didn't see people. They saw tools. Elara was our whole world. We only needed 500,000. We never meant to take more. Miller, but you took the 3 million. Why? Silas Stone, long pause. It felt inevitable. Like fate. If we didn't take all of it, they'd assume we were professionals anyway. We took it, we ran. The bike caught fire on Elm Road. We lost some cash, but we kept going. We didn't hurt anyone, did we? That was the promise. No one gets hurt. Silas confessed everything, meticulously detailing the planning, the execution, the burning getaway, and the complex process of laundering the money through Coral Trust. He confirmed that only he and Elias had been involved. The large professional crime syndicate had been a fabrication built on a stolen motorcycle in desperation. The emotional culmination arrived when Elias, weakened but lucid, agreed to meet them at the house. He was propped up in an armchair, wrapped in a blanket, his breathing shallow. He looked at Miller and Reed, his eyes clear but sad. "We knew we were taking a risk. We knew we were stealing," Elias rasped, his voice barely audible. "But we weren't taking money from a family. We were taking it from a system that left a child to die because her parents couldn't afford the cure. The money was just numbers to them. To us, it was her life." He confirmed that Silas, acting as Hayes, had purchased the tire patch kit the night before because of a small leak in the sidecar tire. A leak he'd meant to fix discreetly at work. He'd reflexively stamped the receipt with his work code, a piece of mundane habit that became their undoing 15 years later. Elias Stone passed away 2 days after giving his full confession, finding his final peace not in freedom, but in revealing the truth. Silas Stone was arrested. The trial of Silas Stone, aka Silas Hayes, was the event of the decade. The prosecution was relentless, focusing on the sheer magnitude of the theft and the sophisticated laundering operation. However, the defense, led by a compassionate public defender, painted a vivid picture of the brothers' desperation, Elara's illness, and the nonviolent nature of the crime. The community of Cedar Creek, witnessing the truth unfold, was divided. Many remembered the quiet, hard-working Hayes boys and their tragic sister. A strong contingent viewed them not as criminals, but as tragic heroes forced into an impossible corner by medical costs and corporate callousness. The jury returned a complex verdict, guilty of grand larceny and conspiracy, but with a powerful recommendation for leniency based on mitigating circumstances and the restitution of the remaining funds. The medical trust was untouched, as the money had been spent on Elara. Silas Stone was sentenced to 7 years in a federal prison, a fraction of the typical sentence for a multi-million-dollar heist. Upon his release, he moved back to Port Rourke, choosing to live out his life quietly, having served his legal and moral penance. The fallout from the Obsidian heist changed Cedar Creek and, in a small way, the national conversation. The First Fidelity Bank, humiliated by the security lapse and the moral stain of the case, quietly closed its doors a year after the conviction. The abandoned building was eventually bought by the town and converted into the Elara Hayes Community Health Center. Elara Hayes, unaware of her brother's sacrifice until after Silas's trial, dedicated her life to nursing, now specializing in patient advocacy for families facing crippling medical debt. She never visited Silas in prison, respecting his need for solitude and her own need to process the shattering, loving truth. She carried the weight of her life, a priceless gift bought with a fortune and 15 years of her brother's silence. Detective Art Miller, finally having closed his white whale, published his findings in a small memoir, Finding His Own Closure. He often said the Obsidian heist was a perfect crime, not because they got away with the money, but because the act of stealing achieved its one true purpose: saving a life. It stands as a chilling reminder that sometimes the lines between criminal and victim are impossibly blurred. What do you think? Was the sentence fair, considering the motive and the outcome? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos, and it will motivate us to make even better videos. See you soon.